So the thing is that, say, right now you are able to see a request and response XML because I have done the configuration in that way. So we have used TCP IP monitor to intercept the request. So once it intercepts the request, TCP IP monitor, whatever request it's coming to it, it's just displaying it to you. So that's something because of which you're able to see the request and response XML. But this is not something which you can do in a production environment, right? So this interceptor can't be there always. If you want, sometimes that, say, for like you want to see the request for today and not like always, you can go and enable the logging, and you can, this handler chain, if it is configured, you can use that. So what handler chain is basically, it's giving you a method, it's giving you a way to have a more handle on the request and response XMLs which are being sent over to the server. So request XML before it is being sent over to the server, response XML before it is being sent to the end user. So here, once you send the request, before sending it, you can you can modify the request XML, and once it comes in, some of the parameters you can modify the response XML also. So this feature is being given to you by the handler chain. Now handler chain, as the name suggests, is a chain of handlers, right? The way in which you have the chain of servlet filters. Now these, the chain of handlers, the specific handlers, what they do is that they implement a interface which has been provided by JAX-WS, right? And this interface which is provided by JAX-WS, if once you implement it, and you configure the handler chain here in the way I was showing, so that handler chain gets invoked with no further configuration is required. That handler chain is invoked first when you have the request XML before it is sent to the server, and once the response XML comes in. So that's the thing which is done from the provider perspective. Now the specific handlers, once you implement the message, what they get is that you have to implement a method on message, and there you get reference to a class, to an object of a class. That class is called SOAP message. Its name itself is SOAP message, SOAP message. Now this SOAP message is nothing but it is either of type of request type or it is a response type. So once you get the SOAP request, you can modify anything, even the values which you are setting here. These values, these arguments, if you want that, if it is WhatsApp, I want to replace it with WhatsApp 1. If you want to do that, handler chain is a place to do it, to have all those common set of configurations. So one of the configurations can be that I want to print the request and response XMLs, right? So if that is the requirement, right? If you want to print the request and response XMLs always, you can go and make changes, and once you implement this handler, you basically will have to implement the on message method. There you get the reference to the object of the class SOAP message, and you basically inside that you can check that if it is a request, print it; if it is a response, print it. So what I am saying is that it gives you more flexibility, that if you want that only the request should be printed, that will be printed. If you want the only response should be printed, that can be printed. Or if you want both to be printed, that can be printed. So if you want this to be, so this configuration will always go along with the production environment application code. But if you want to enable only on one day and not on other days, you can do configurations which is outside of the application to do that. So there are some log level configurations which you can do, that if you want to disable the logs from a particular package, you can do it, right? And if you want to enable it in a particular day, you'll have to ask server operations team to do that change. They'll do it, and again the logs will start appearing. So that change is also possible, right? So that's what the handler chain is all about. Is it clear now, Aarti? Okay. So let's draw a parallelism between the WSDL and the things which we have done, so that we understand what we are discussing, right? So we'll start one by one. One section which had was types. Now this type section is empty because your message structure which is here is very simple. It only has one part. But if you have, like, say, customer object, inside that you have 5 attributes. One of the attributes is address. You need to define what all goes inside the address. So basically you need to define the data types, which you can do here. Okay, and this can be exported in the sense that this data can be put in a separate XML schema definition file, and you can import those XSDs also. So it's very much possible it can be done, right? But since our case is simple, we are not getting into it. Let's see the message part. The request is here, the response is defined. This is the envelope, like the top level class tag name is get hello world as string, and similarly get hello world as string response is the top level tag uh, at the response side. And inside that we have only one element each. Like if you can correlate from here, you have one argument here and you have one return type here. So the same thing has been configured here as well. So this is your message. So this shows how your this message actually will show how your request and response XML should be. So from here you can draw that parallelism. Okay. And again, this if you see, I mean, as discussed earlier, definitions is a top level tag. Okay. Now let's come back to the next one. So port type is basically which defines all the operations which are permissible within the ambit of this particular web service. So this one WSDL stands for one service, and within that service you can have multiple operations. So one of the operations is get hello world as string. You have the input, you have the output, and once you have the input and the output, you define the message also. Like this is a message which is for the input, this is a message which is for the output. Now coming back to binding, so here binding basically means you bind which protocol has to be used for which particular operation. So that is what is binding means. So if you see here binding, it defines the name, the type, and it defines the SOAP binding. So basically it says that what you have to use for this particular binding. So this clearly defines that we have to use SOAP, right? And we have to use RPC style. Now what is RPC style we'll see later, right? But let's understand for now that this is how the binding is done. Now you define at the individual level that for the operation what is possible, what is possible at the input level, what is possible at the output level. So you define all those things. So literally is nothing but encoding etc. is defined here, that how the messages will flow over the network. So let's not get into those details, but yeah, so this is how it is. Now coming back to once you have this binding, coming back to the actual service. So this is the service, hello world IMPL service, and then the port is defined here. So once you define the port is the one which relates everything together. Now binding is the one which related what? Which related port type with the protocols. So this is basically defining your network level details, how the transmission has to occur, right? And what is the URL where it will be accessible? That is defined in the port. So port basically relates binding with the URL where the service is, and binding actually shows how the message will flow in the network to reach this particular URL, and what that message is constituting of, that is being defined in the port type which this particular binding has. So let's not confuse you further. I'm just trying to give you a relationship so that you understand it for always. I mean, you do not have to mug it up, because if you do not understand it very clearly, what will happen is that you'll understand it now, tomorrow you'll again forget it. So you'll again have to go back and see it. And I don't have any any hesitation in saying that this has occurred to me also a number of times. So that's why I'm giving that advice, that understand it very clearly, even if it takes some time. so that it is clear to you as to what needs to be done, and then you can take it further. Okay. So the thing here is that you have operations defined, right? Now these operations are nothing. When you say operations defined, it means that everything, request and response, right? And when you have this request and response, that relationship is basically taken care of by binding. So binding says that this request and response should be transmitted over a network using like SOAP, the style should be RPC, the encoding should be literal. So all those things are defined. Okay. Now, so this basically defines the relationship between the request and response and the network, right? So binding defines So I hope this one statement should explain whatever I was trying to explain earlier. Now, after binding, what you need? So the next level is that port, right? So, and this is called as port type. So operations defined is nothing but port type. Now, what is port? So port basically defines the relationship between binding and the URL. Right? So port is the relationship between binding and URL. So this completes your entire chain, if you see. So you have like once you hit a particular service, you should define the request and the response that is coming from the binding and how it has to be transmitted over the network that also binding says. And once you have this port, from here you can know where their service is actually hosted. So if you what is being done by JAX WS or any web service implementation is that they will use these definitions, these XML definitions, which the XML which is here, to create the corresponding classes. You'll have one class of binding, you'll have one class of port type, you'll have one class for port. So these things would be there. Okay. Now you have to start using it, right? So this port, the class which it has, now this has reference to URL. This in a way has a reference to the network where the data has to be transmitted, and because of this relationship it has reference to the request and response which has to be sent over. So this is the ideal place from where you can actually do the work, right? So this is what is being done here also. If you go and see, now once you get this service, so this is just a proxy, right? So from this proxy we are trying to get the port, right? So we are trying to get the port, and this is what we get. So we get the relationship. So we got all the information from here. So if you're using anything else, you would have got something which is not out there, which doesn't have the complete information. So binding also doesn't have complete information, right? Because binding and port is related via port itself. There is no other relationship. So and plus URL is also defined here. So port is basically the starting point. So you get the port, right? And then you invoke the method on it. Okay. So you should remember that one way to access a web service is via port. Right? Now this should give you like ample amount of information about what I was trying to explain here. Right? Now this hello world IMPL which is here. Now if you see, this hello world IMPL is not defined as such in this particular WSDL, right? This is not defined in this particular WSDL. So the reason it is not defined in this particular WSDL, like whatever is out here, let me go back. So you see, so we have not defined it anywhere. The reason it is not defined here is, first of all, while doing the client level work, in the sense that when you're hitting the client level. You do not need the actual reference to the actual implementation, right? Because that is on the server side. So this class is only required on the server side, because only the server side hosts the actual work. So if you want to do it independently, like say this particular part, you can have it in a separate package. This thing you can have in a separate package altogether. So that is also a possibility, because both of them do not go together. The server can be in a different location, the client can be in a different location. So that is also, like say, a possibility, right? So this is one thing. Now coming back to yes. So now coming back to here, where you want to. So this hello world IMPL, once you implement it, right? So where do we define? So if you remember the publisher, so there we said that if this is a URL, this is a class which will take care of it. So this is how you relate the implementation class. Otherwise, implementation class doesn't have direct relationship. Now this completes the entire loop for you. Okay, so this is what WSDL stands for. This is what is the relationship between WSDL and the actual classes which are generated. Any questions till now? Guys, any questions till now? Aarti, Raghav, Shala, Shravan. Any questions? You guys understood? Things are clear to you?